Well, thank you, Annie, for that very nice introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be with all of you this morning. Thank you for coming out and for braving the construction, those of you who drove. I come out here often, and that was a new one on me, so I'm glad to see you all. So as you know, and as Annie mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you this morning about this fellow, Bernardo de Gálvez. And as my remarks unfold, it'll become obvious as to why it's entirely fitting that we talk about Bernardo in conjunction with the observation of our 250th anniversary of our independence from Great Britain. So on December 16th, 2014, President Obama signed a joint resolution of Congress making Bernardo de Gálvez an honorary citizen of the United States. This is the highest honor that the United States government can bestow on a non-citizen. To provide some perspective on how elite and small a group this is, Winston Churchill is also an honorary citizen of the United States. I think there are about 10 of them is all. The joint resolution states that Bernardo was, and I quote, a hero of the Revolutionary War who risked his life for the freedom of the United States people. His victories against the British were recognized by George Washington as a deciding factor in the outcome of the Revolutionary War, end quote. Several geographic locations in and around the United States are named for him, including Galveston Bay, Galveston, Texas, Galveston County, Texas, Galveston, Louisiana, Galvez, Louisiana, and St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana. But he and the role that he played in the Revolutionary War are almost unknown. I certainly knew little about this significant member of the 18th century Spanish Empire. Moreover, like myself, I assume most are woefully ignorant of the significant role that Spain played in our War of Independence. For many years, I labored under the misimpression that this war was mainly fought in New England between British people, some of whom wanted to be free of Britain. And this was not the case. It is also but forgotten that our War of Independence was merely a theater of a world war, with Spain, France, and the Dutch Republic aligned against Great Britain. This world war saw battles fought on 3 continents in such places as Bermuda, Minorca, Gibraltar, Guatemala, St. Eustatius, Saba, St. Martin, Pondicherry, Cuddalore, and the Bay of Bengal. Why did Spain elect to involve itself in our War of Revolution? Simply put, its involvement was intended to advance its own foreign policy objectives. Those objectives were, first, revenge against the British for Spain's defeat in the 7 Years' War. Second, pursuit of its traditional confrontation with Britain in the Americas by driving the British out of Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, and the east bank of the Mississippi. And third, weaken the British Empire in general. And fourth, recover specific territories, especially Gibraltar and Minorca, which Spain ceded to Britain in the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht. The Treaty of Utrecht ended the 1701 7 Years' War. By 1783, all of these objectives had been achieved, except for obtaining Gibraltar. Helping America achieve its independence from Britain was not among Spain's strategic objectives. And the Catholic King Carlos of Spain was careful to avoid a formal alliance with the fledgling United States. It was largely a Protestant republic, after all. For him, the Americas would be useful only as a distraction for Britain. His goal instead was to recapture for his empire everything that he'd lost to Britain during the 7 Years' War. And the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht, prior to a declaration of war against Britain, much of Spain's financial and material and supporting the American Revolution was covert. Nevertheless, there is no question but that Spain's entry into the Revolutionary War tripped the balance decidedly against the British and toward the American rebels. Galvez's initial role in our War of Independence was to channel most of Spain's covert aid to the American insurgents. After Spain declared war on Britain, he led Spanish troops against British redcoats along the Mississippi River and at Mobile and Pensacola. We will talk more about Bernardo's military actions in a moment. These military actions were a significant help to the Americans because they prevented some British military and naval resources from concentrating exclusively on Washington's Continental Army, thus making a huge difference in the American rebels' chances of succeeding in their quest for independence. Likewise, Spain's and France's war against Britain on other fronts required Britain to devote troops and resources that might otherwise have been employed to put down rebellion in British North America. The Spanish and French siege of British-held Gibraltar, for instance, lasted from 1779 to 1783, tying down British forces. It was the largest military action of the Revolution, involving at least 40,000 soldiers and sailors. Spain also contributed significant economic aid to the Americas' fight against Great Britain, which totaled approximately $2 billion in today's dollars. Spain also opened its Caribbean ports to American trade, which was essential both for the new American nation to sustain its military efforts and for the American Navy, which was able to use these Spanish ports for safe docking, to rest its crews, and to refit and reprovision its ships. So turning to the man himself, in the time we have today, I can provide only a summary of his life. Galvez was born on July 23, 1746, in southern Spain. His family were shepherds, not nobility, so they were of limited social status and influence. While his father was an army officer, he had few friends in the top echelons of the army. However, his uncle, José de Galvez, made himself indispensable to the Viceroy of New Spain and was able to significantly influence his nephew's career. José's very interesting career is worthy of its own paper, but our focus here is on his nephew, Bernardo. On June 12, 1762, José, through his connections at the French embassy in Madrid, secured a commission as a lieutenant in the French army for Bernardo. The Bourbons of France were allied with the Bourbons of Spain against Britain, and it was not uncommon for Spanish soldiers to begin their military careers in the French army. Bernardo was 16 at the time he received his lieutenant's commission. In 1769, Bernardo arrived in New Spain, and at the age of 23, received a captain's commission. He was posted to the Presidio at Chihuahua in April 1769 and was part of an expedition to Nueva Vizcaya against the Apaches. Nueva Vizcaya was in the northern part of New Spain and is today's states of Durango and Chihuahua. Bernardo learned much fighting the Apaches. That would be useful to him in the future, both when fighting in Algeria and when fighting against the British in Louisiana and Florida. He was wounded during the expedition and developed a reputation of being fearless. Bernardo returned to Spain in 1772 and joined an infantry regiment as a captain at the age of 26. He left the regiment in 1774 due to an appointment to the Royal Academy of Avila, which was created to instruct young officers who showed great promise in the hope of developing a cadre of young, scientifically oriented officers who would help found a new model army for Spain. In In 1776, Bernardo was part of a Spanish military expedition against Algiers. He was given command of a light infantry company. The light infantry acted as skirmishers, gathering intelligence for the army's main body. Bernardo was well suited to this type of fighting due to his combat experience against the Apaches. He was wounded in the leg and distinguished himself by staying with his troops despite his wound until ordered to leave the field. His gallant service did not go unnoticed. The expedition was a disaster for Spain, but garnered Bernardo a promotion to lieutenant colonel and command of a grenadier company in 1776. At the age of 29, and with only 13 and a half years of active service, Bernardo was a lieutenant colonel when the average age of a lieutenant colonel in the Spanish army was 50. Moreover, a few months later, Bernardo was appointed colonel of an infantry regiment in Louisiana and governor of Louisiana. His knowledge of the French language and the French, as well as his experience in New Spain, were cited as reasons for his appointment. Of course, it did not hurt that his uncle, Jose, had been appointed the all-powerful minister of the Indies late in 1775, and as such had the king's ear and became the chief administrator of Spain's New World colonies. Bernardo's career had taken off in a big way. Bernardo arrived in Louisiana at the end of 1776, and at the age of 30, when our Revolutionary War was not going so well. In August of 1776, 30,000 redcoats and a powerful British fleet landed in New York and quickly conquered it to provide the British with a base of operations to use against the American rebels. Bernardo began to prepare for war against the British upon his arrival in New Orleans by raising an army and creating and supervising a spy network in Florida. These preparations would serve him well when Spain declared war on Britain, which occurred on June 21st, 1779. However, even before Spain entered the war, Bernardo had secretly been aiding the United States by opening the port of New Orleans to American rebel privateers, allowing only American ships into the lower Mississippi and funneling weapons, ammunition, blankets, and medicine up the river to Americans fighting in Indian country. I was surprised to learn that this war impacted our New Mexico ancestors, as the king demanded that all of his subjects shoulder the economic burden of paying for the war. The famous Juan Bautista de Anza was governor of New Mexico at the time and was charged with securing a contribution from the king's New Mexico subjects. All free subjects of European ancestry were required to contribute 2 pesos. Castas, people of mixed race, were required to donate 1 peso. New Mexico's Indians were required to donate 1 peso. Anza requested that the Zunis, Pecos, and Hopis be exempted because of their extreme poverty, and which request was granted. New Mexico's contribution totaled 3,677 pesos, of which 233 pesos were in the form of seed. The king was grateful to his New Mexico subjects and issued a royal edict, which Anza posted throughout the Kingdom of New Mexico, that extended the king's official gratitude to all Nuevo Mexicanos who had shared their bounty for the defense of New Spain. I'm not sure this edict was viewed by New Mexicans very positively, for they were well aware that the king had taken their money for a war that was very, very far away from them. A month prior to Spain's declaration of war against Britain, Spain informed its officials in America that the declaration was imminent. Bernardo did not wait for the official declaration before initiating his plans to attack the British, which he intended to do on August 22nd, 1779. However, on August 18th, a hurricane struck and sunk all of his ships. Nevertheless, Bernardo was determined and resolved to attack the British. His thinking was that if the British thought that Spain could not attack them because of the hurricane, now was the perfect time for a surprise attack. But Bernardo needed the support of the local population in order to carry off such an attack. The locals salvaged everything that had survived the hurricane to provide Bernardo with the means to attack the British. 4 small ships were removed from the river bottom, repaired, armed with cannon, and provisioned. On August 27th, Bernardo and his small force moved against the British Fort Butte at Manchac, Louisiana, on the east bank of the Mississippi, about 115 miles upstream from New Orleans. A few American volunteers were among his force, and they fought under the American flag. Next, his army moved to attack New Richmond at Baton Rouge, which was a much more daunting affair than the one at Fort Manchac. Baton Rouge was defended by 900 men, 400 of whom were veterans, 13 cannons, a moat, and earthen walls. Bernardo had about 951 men, but he had 10 cannons of larger caliber than the English, which meant they had longer range than the British guns. As a result of Bernardo's superior tactics, the British were forced to surrender. Between 485 and 577 British prisoners were taken. The English suffered 36 dead and 10 wounded. Bernardo forced the surrendering redcoats to give up not only Fort Richmond, but also Fort Natchez. Thus, Spain obtained 2 significant English settlements on the Mississippi, but had to attack only one. Including Natchez in the surrender terms, is regarded as a masterstroke by Bernardo. While Bernardo was busy conquering British forts along the Mississippi, the American corvette Morris and the British ship West Florida fought on Lake Pontchartrain near New Orleans. This resulted in the Americans capturing the West Florida, which was a much larger and better armed vessel than the Morris. The importance of this action is that the West Florida became a Spanish vessel under the name Galveston and would play a significant role in Bernardo's future campaign against Pensacola. We will return to the importance of the Galveston. From America's point of view, Bernardo's achievements during the campaign dispersed British forces that otherwise could have united against Washington's Continental Army. It also helped to relieve pressure from the British against Georgia and South Carolina. Finally, it ensured that Spanish aid to America could reach General Washington via the Mississippi, which was now a Spanish river. Following the very successful expedition, Bernardo's uncle assured Bernardo was promoted to brigadier general, affirming Bernardo's position as the supreme commander of all military operations in Spain's North American theater. It was good to have friends in high places. Some Americans were displeased by the Spanish conquests because, of course, those acquisitions by Spain could not be incorporated into the new United States, nor could the United States freely navigate the Mississippi because it was now controlled by Spain. Bernardo's next task was the conquest of Mobile and Pensacola, which he correctly felt were the keys to ridding the Gulf of British. Mobile was first on Bernardo's agenda. Mobile's Fort Charlotte was defended by between 120 and 300 British soldiers, while Spain's attacking force numbered 1,300. Therefore, the garrison's only hope was to hold on until reinforcements from Pensacola could reach them. Bernardo asked the British commander to surrender, but he refused, whereupon Bernardo initiated the siege of Fort Charlotte. The fort fell on March 12th after a day-long exchange of artillery fire. 1,100 British reinforcements were indeed on their way from Pensacola, but failed to reach Fort Charlotte in time. Pensacola was next for Bernardo, but it was too strong. Bernardo needed reinforcements from Havana. Such reinforcements were not forthcoming because despite direct orders from the king to support Bernardo's Pensacola expedition, Cuba's governor and other military leaders were dragging their feet. The governor and highly placed military men were jealous of Bernardo's success and meteoric rise in the eyes of the king, and they didn't want to help him. Therefore, they prevaricated. To counter this resistance, Bernardo resorted to subterfuge. Instead of asking for troops and transports to attack Pensacola, he asked for troops and transports to carry troops to reinforce the garrisons at New Orleans and Mobile. Finally, after much effort by Bernardo and his allies, the expedition for the conquest of Pensacola set sail from Havana with 5 warships, 27 transports, and more than 1,500 soldiers. Bernardo had to land his infantry on the mainland in order to initiate the siege of Pensacola. He needed the Navy's help to do that. That help was not forthcoming because the Navy commander thought the British defenses at Pensacola were too strong, and he had no pilot to guide him through the hidden sandbars. Bernardo's authority to command the Navy was murky, such that the senior officer felt comfortable disobeying Bernardo's order to enter the bay on the basis that his prime objective was to take care of his fleet. Fortunately for Bernardo, the Galveston, you will remember the Galveston from the fight on Lake Pontchartrain, was under his direct command and not under the command of the Navy. He boarded the Galveston and with 2 other ships entered the bay and anchored. Seeing his success, the rest of the fleet, including the troop transports, entered the bay. The following day, these ships were able to pass safely into the bay because the British cannons at the mouth of the bay were positioned such that they could not be depressed sufficiently to hit the Spanish ships. Therefore, despite more than 140 British rounds fired at the Spanish fleet, all of the ships entered the bay undamaged. This put Bernardo's infantry in a position to disembark onto the mainland and begin the siege. When Bernardo succeeded in forcing the entry into the bay, he addressed his men saying, and I quote, "I, my sons, went alone to sacrifice myself, so as not to expose a single soldier, not a man of my army, and so the Navy could see there is no danger," unquote. This is the origin of the famous motto, "Yo solo," I alone, which historians have used extensively in reference to Bernardo. Years later, the king would add "Yo solo" to Bernardo's coat of arms. This is an abbreviated version of the coat of arms granted by King Carlos III to Bernardo as Count of Galvez. The coat of arms includes the heraldic symbols of Bernardo's family, and in the lower right corner, a reference to his victory at the Battle of Pensacola. Bernardo wields his sword above the sloop Galveston, which hoists a chief of squadron banner under his motto, "Yo solo." So you can see that right here. And you see Bernardo there on the ship. Bernardo was perfectly aware that he didn't force the entry into Pensacola Bay by himself, and that he needed the crews of the other ships that he commanded to thank for his success, which he did publicly. During the course of the siege, Bernardo received reinforcements that he eventually commanded an army consisting of about 7,000 men, 15 ships of the line, 4 frigates, and over 30 other vessels. The two sides exchanged artillery fire, but on May 8th, Spanish artillery caused a huge explosion in the main redoubt that contained the powder magazine, and Bernardo ordered his troops to attack, which resulted in the fall of the redoubt. The explosion killed almost 100 men, and they were mostly American loyalists. The loyalists were those who were loyal to the King of England. With the redoubt in Spanish hands, Fort George could not survive, and 6 hours later, the British hoisted the white flag on May 10th. The British agreed to articles of capitulation, which prohibited British POWs from further action against Spain or its allies. Total British casualties were 90 dead, 46 wounded, and 1,113 taken prisoner. The British also lost many significant military supplies. Spanish control of the Gulf was restored. It was not a good day for the British. The prisoners were taken to Cuba, but shortly after arriving, they set sail for New York. Spain's casualties were 95 killed and 202 wounded. Despite Spain's success against the British at Pensacola, Americans were not pleased about that part of the Articles of Capitulation which precluded British POWs from further action against Spain or its allies. Because Spain and America were not formally allied, those British POWs going to New York from Havana, and there were about 1,000 of them, were sent to reinforce British positions there. Samuel Huntington, president of the Continental Congress, said in a July 2, 1781 letter to George Washington, and I quote, "I cannot persuade myself that Governor Galvez, who commanded the expedition and who manifested the most friendly sentiments and attachment for us, would admit of terms so apparently detrimental to these states," unquote. While Huntington's views are correct, among Spain's strategic objectives was the expulsion of the British from the Gulf of Mexico. Bernardo accomplished that with the fall of Pensacola. Therefore, while this may not have suited the aims of the American rebels, Bernardo's conduct was intended to and did in fact further Spain's foreign policy objectives. Significantly for the Americans, Spain's victory at Pensacola meant that the war in the Gulf region was over, meaning that the British could now focus all of its resources on its war with the fledgling United States. Neither was welcome news in the new United States. One U.S. politician noted, and I quote, "The success of the Spaniards at Pensacola will be more prejudicial to our operations than their failure would have been," end quote. The victory at Pensacola was a very big deal for Spain and caused Bernardo to be named Spain's supreme commander of all military operations in the Gulf region. All commanders in Havana who had dragged their feet in supporting Bernardo's efforts against Pensacola were removed. The king promoted Bernardo to the rank of lieutenant general, the highest rank in the Spanish army at the time. Bernardo was 35 and the youngest lieutenant general in the Spanish army. The king also decreed that the Great Bay of Pensacola would henceforth bear the name Santa Maria de Galvez Bay. The king said that this was, and I quote, "in memory of the conqueror who has reclaimed it for the crown," unquote. 2 years after the conquest of Pensacola, Bernardo was awarded the title of Count of Galvez and Viscount of Galveston. Bernardo thereby became part of the Spanish titled aristocracy, which was not only a success for Bernardo, but also for his entire family. The Galvez clan was at its height. Bernardo's father, Mateus, was viceroy of New Spain. His uncle, Jose, was minister of the Indies and would be made Marquess of Sonora in 2 years. And Bernardo was a lieutenant general and a count. Not one to rest on his laurels, in August of 1781, Bernardo returned to Cuba and began planning the invasion of Jamaica. However, Jamaica would be a harder nut to crack than Pensacola, because Port Royal had been a British possession for more than 100 years, had impressive defenses, and a sizable, well-supplied garrison. Bernardo believed he would need at least 20,000 troops and a fleet of more than 30 ships of the line, with substantial help from the French fleet and army to topple Jamaica. Such an expedition would also require a great deal of money. Despite his best efforts, Bernardo was unable to raise sufficient troops or ships for the expedition in 1781, so he postponed it. Before Bernardo could gather the necessary resources for the Jamaica expedition, the war ended, and the treaty was signed in September of 1783. Subsequently, the king ordered Bernardo to return to Spain and present himself at court, where in January of 1784, the king appointed him supreme military commander of Florida and Louisiana, which was a huge territory from the Mississippi to the Pacific Ocean. 6 months later, he was also appointed the supreme commander of Cuba. In other words, Bernardo was now the supreme authority over all Spanish territory in North and Central America and the Caribbean, and also became the Inspector General of all Spanish troops in America. Following these appointments, Bernardo set sail for Cuba in late 1784 or early 1785. In January of 1785, he was ordered to move to New Spain to become its acting viceroy. His father, Mateus, was the viceroy of New Spain, but he was ill, and the king wanted Bernardo to act for him. When Mateus died, Bernardo succeeded him as viceroy. This was a significant appointment. By the late 18th century, Mexico City was the most cosmopolitan city in the Americas. Its population approached 150,000, far exceeding that of Lima, Rio de Janeiro, or Havana. Cities in the rebelling British colonies did not come close. Philadelphia, the largest, counted roughly 40,000 inhabitants. Mexico City was the location of a powerful viceregal court and an expansive bureaucracy governing half the continent, including the distant province of New Mexico. Bernardo's link to the American Revolution ends with the 1783 Treaty of Paris, but his story goes on for a few years as Viceroy of New Spain. As Viceroy, he touched New Mexico in August of 1785, ordering Governor de Anza to provide him a comprehensive report regarding the kingdom's state of affairs. He also reorganized New Mexico's governing structure. Since the focus is why Bernardo is a hero of the American Revolution, I will not go further into his time as Viceroy, other than to say he initiated many reforms, including a sweeping new policy to pacify the northern frontier, particularly the Apaches, and he was an extremely popular Viceroy. In sum, it was a highly successful chapter in his life. His frontier policy set the tone for Spanish colonial rule until the end of the colonial era. He contracted amoebic dysentery and at the age of 40 died in Mexico City on November 30th, 1786. He is buried there in the Church of San Fernando next to his father. He was survived by his wife and 3 children, one of whom was born after he died. Spain's victories under his leadership made the British defeat more definitive and helped the United States gain maximum concessions during the subsequent peace treaty negotiations in Paris. Bernardo diverted British men, supplies, and attention away from the colonies, thus aiding the cause through a strategy about which Bernardo and George Washington concurred. He was a man of many accomplishments in his all too brief 40 years. And while his contributions to the American Revolution were focused on furthering Spain's foreign policy objectives, the American rebels were fortunate to have had common cause with Bernardo, honorary citizen of the United States and hero of the American Revolution. Thank you very much. I will be happy to try to answer any questions if I can. If you'd like to know more about Bernardo, I have brought you some books here that you might want to look at. This one is Bernardo de Gálvez, and its subtitle is Spanish Hero of the American Revolution. These two are by Tom Chavez, and this is Revolutionary Diplomacy. This one came out very recently. And this one is Spain and the Independence of the United States, an intrinsic gift, as I said, also by Tom Chavez. This one has been around for a while. Okay, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
How did they retrieve the ships from the bottom of the river?
That's a very good question. Yeah, they were. It was a shallow, and I'm riffing here. I'm not quite sure. I imagine they did it with ropes and animals, and it was probably fairly shallow where they went down. That's just my guess. Yeah, but they were retrieved. That's a fact. They got them up. Yeah. Lynn.
This doesn't exactly have to do with Bernardo, but it piques my interest in the part where the Americans were kind of like not too crazy about Spain tromping into their territory. How did that actually work out in the end? Because we kind of know this side, but the Mississippi and Pensacola and all that, we might
Another good question. They resolved, there were issues of debt also, because Spain, debt, there were about $2 billion that they, in today's dollars, that Spain had loaned the United States government to pursue the war against Great Britain. So all that was worked out by treaty. The ability to navigate the Mississippi freely was also settled. That was all done by treaty and in negotiation. Yeah. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Somebody else had a question back there? No? Yeah, Lynn, go ahead.
That coat of arms was kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you know more details about it? Like, because it had a bunch of things in it. Like,
Yeah.
the thing at the bottom looks like the French fleur-de-lis almost.
Yeah.
And also you had a bunch of goats over on the
Yeah,
side.
yeah. Yeah, you know, as I said, his family were shepherds, and I think that has to do with it. And you have to understand that this is a portion of the coat of arms. I think it's the lower left. As you're looking at it, it would be the lower left. So there's more up on top and around to the right side. It's quite extensive, and I have no idea about these issues of heraldic significance.
Because it seems like such a mixture, like that lion figure.
Yeah.
Associate that with, sort of Germanic history.
Yeah.
I forget the name of that thing, but it's just a really interesting hodgepodge of stuff, and I'm sure every single piece of it is significant.
Yeah, and I'm sure.
Sort of like Art Nouveau in the middle with like 3 dots and a checkered border. Wow.
That's right. No, and as I said, I brought this up really to point out that, this Yo Solo thing that was so significant for Bernardo. Yes, sir.
I think that references Castile and Leon,
Yes.
which is also on the Santa Fe coat of arms.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, although there seem to be 2 castles.
Yeah, I think you're right.
2 castles.
Uh-huh. Good point. Anything else? Comments? Yes.
So he did when he took the 2 settlements, that was before they had officially declared war.
No, that was after. I'm sorry, I didn't, maybe I didn't make that clear. It was after Spain had declared war on Britain that he moved against those 2 settlements on the Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Yeah.